In today's video, I'm going to be taking Canon Log 3 footage and converting it to a film look. Actually, multiple film looks. But I'm not talking about just crushing the blacks and flattening the blue curve so that it looks more filmic like we used to do in 2015. No, I'm actually talking about using a real film emulator. Maybe the best film emulator on the market today. What's up guys, thanks for checking out another video. If you're new here, my name is Anthony and I make videos that I hope will teach and inspire you to make better videos. If that's something you're into, consider subscribing to this channel and give this video a like if you get something out of it. Now, the film look that I'm talking about comes from a program called Dehancer. It's Dehancer Pro. I think there was a version before this one that wasn't quite as popular, but this version is very good. The only downside is right now the only alpha version is for DaVinci Resolve. And I'm a Premiere Pro user, so forgive me if I shuffle around a little bit. But let's move to the computer and check it out. All right, a quick disclaimer before we get started. This is not a sponsored video, but Dehancer did reach out to me and send me a copy of the Dehancer Pro application for DaVinci Resolve in order for me to do this review. They didn't give me anything to highlight. They didn't tell me that I had to say anything specifically. These are my opinions about this plugin. Everything that I say are my thoughts. All right, so applying the plugin is very easy. You just go in to your open effects. If you go to your library, it's going to be found all the way on the bottom there. You just plug it into your node. I did all the color grading on this entire timeline with just Dehancer Pro. Let's jump into everything that it offers. Firstly, you might notice that it looks a lot like another program, Filmconvert Nitrate. There are a few glaringly obvious similarities between Dehancer Pro and Filmconvert Nitrate, and this camera section is one of them. One big difference is that when you choose your camera, you're not necessarily choosing your camera. What you're wanting to do is find your color profile that you used. So I used a C70 to film this footage, and in order to find the profile that I used, I needed to get the C200 because, as you can see, the only Canon cameras that Dehancer has in here is the C200 and the M50. Under the C200, you have BT709, you have Log 3, and you have Log 3 Cinema Gamut. I shot in Log 3 Cinema Gamut. Now, there aren't a lot of options under those color profiles, so you want to make sure that you use one of those color profiles if you're using a Canon C70 or another cinema line camera from Canon if you plan on using Dehancer. If you shot on another color profile, then you're not out of luck. We'll run over how to do that in just a few minutes, but let's move on from here. You've got your exposure compensation, your defringing, you've got defringing radius. I didn't use any of the defringing, so the defringing radius on here isn't gonna do anything. But if I move my exposure compensation, this was properly exposed to maybe just a little bit underexposed. To compensate for that, we can pull it up, and you can pull it up quite a bit. Right around 2, you start losing some detail in the sky, and then you keep going up. And the shadows still maintain a pretty decent range, but let's undo that a few times and get back to our starting point. Under film, you've got 57 different films. I chose the Ektar 25, and this one is one that actually expired in 1996. You can see how detailed Dehancer got with their selection of films that they're trying to emulate here. But let's go through a couple of these and let's see what those look like. You got your ADOX Color Implosion 100, Agfa Color. I've never even heard of that one. Agfa Color Portrait. One thing I wish this did is that I wish you could just go in there and press the arrow down. Or I wish it would give you a preview of what your image looked like when you hover over the different film stocks, but it doesn't, and so you have to actually choose it in order to do that. And if we keep going down, all of these are really true to form, really look like what the film stock actually was intended to look like. If I go down to something more popular like Fuji Eterna, that looks incredible. I mean, I've taken photos on Fujifilms before, and these colors look almost exactly like what they turn out to look like. Kodak Gold is a really popular film stock, and it's going to be a little bit more contrasty as well. But there's 57 of these to look through. Also, under everything except for input, you can choose to enable or disable it. So if I wanted to disable my film look, I could just click that arrow right there and disable the film look. And then under the auto expand, I could push that and it will auto expand my contrast to make the image look more like what the film would actually have as far as dynamic range. But if you want to use some of the more modern dynamic range, like the Canon C70 has about 14 stops of dynamic range, I want to utilize that so that I can see those clouds in the highlights here. I can take that auto expand off and just go down here to expand. And if I move my black point down, you'll see the whole image gets a lot brighter. If I move the black point all the way up, you'll see it pushes those lows down. And same thing for the whites. If I move that down, they get a lot brighter. And if I move it up, it gets a lot darker. Print is another place where you can do a little bit more contrasting and color grading. So if we take the EV and bring it down, you can see kind of what it's doing. This is kind of emulating the process of printing the film stock to a printable paper. It's a digital reproduction of it, but you can get the look to be really close to printing film onto cardstock. And then down here on color head, this is where you can actually do some color grading. And the way that you do it in this is a lot different than the normal way that you would color grade, because you're actually grading in CMYK here. So you're actually doing subtractive color grading in this case. Let me do this one thing real quick. I'm going to turn off preserve exposure so that you can see exactly what we're doing. So if I take my yellow and I bring it all the way down, now you can see that you've got this yellow hue over the whole thing. And if I take my magenta green and bring that all the way down, now you can see that red really is the only thing left. But if I take that and bring it all the way down, now you'll see that it goes to almost black. That's because we did subtractive color grading here. We took away colors. When you do that with print, it actually makes the entire image go a lot darker because you're adding more ink. And the more ink that you add, the blacker the tones get. And now if I go and add blue, add green, and add red, you'll see it goes all the way up to almost white. Because when you take away cyan, magenta, and yellow, then the photo goes almost white because you're not putting enough ink onto the cardstock. It's not true color grading because what you're doing is adding and subtracting digital ink from a digital photo. So keep that in mind. In my opinion, this is not a true color grading tool. This is a film emulation tool. And so my opinion is that you should color grade first and then add the film emulation tool. And then it's obviously got a film grain. So we've got our size. As the film grain goes up, the softness of the entire image goes down with it, which is really cool because if you were actually shooting on film, that's what would happen. I would say this is more like a Super 8 type of film grain. You can bring it down to 8-ish, which looks a lot like a Super 16 type of film grain. If you go down to about 2, I would say that's more like a Super 35, maybe even a 35 millimeter type film grain. And at 1, you can still see the film grain, but you really have to try. And then the amount, film resolution. So we could bring that all the way up and get a much more sharp image, bring it down. And you can see that we actually got a little bit of coloring going on, I think. And just like in Filmconvert, we've got our shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now you don't have it in a curve, but you can still control those. So if I turn down my midtones and my highlights and just turn up the shadows, you can see that the grain is really strong in the shadow areas, but it's not even in the highlights at all. Then if I do the same thing for the midtones, now it's in the midtones. Now if I turn it on in the highlights, wow, it actually saved some of the highlights. That's surprising. Now after the film grain, that's about the extent of what Filmconvert Nitrate does, but Dehancer actually goes like 3 or 4 steps further than that in order to try to get a real film look. And halation is the first step. If you don't know what halation is, if you ever see those old movies where it was actually shot on film and you're looking into a flashlight or you're looking directly into a light and you see this red glow around that light, that is what halation is. You might notice it on Jessica's hat as she walks into this little area. But what's really cool about this one, and my favorite feature about Dehancer probably, is that you can solo the halation and you can solo the bloom effect so that you can see exactly what it's doing, so that you can fine tune it and know what you're looking at. So if I go to mask mode, you can actually see what's going on. Every little detail that's being halated. Is that the thing? Is that how you say it? Turn off mask mode and you can see exactly what's going on. The other thing that it has that I really love is bloom. A really popular thing to do to enhance the look of your film is to put a Tiffin Pro Mist filter on your lens before you shoot so that you get this really nice bloom effect. A lot of times film actually had that effect built into it. The reason that we have to use those filters now is because the digital stuff that we use today actually has a lot of stuff in there to take away those imperfections. And when we're trying to emulate film, we want to actually put some of those imperfections back. So under bloom, we can mask that and see what's going on there. I've got it enabled, and you can see that around those contrasted areas, it's adding a white bloom around there. So if we turn that off, you can see I'm gonna disable it and then enable it, disable, enable. You can see that it gives that nice blooming effect to everything in this image. Let's move to vignetting, bring it down. All the way down looks like that, all the way up just makes the whole thing overblown. Film breadth is the amount of color difference between each frame. The period is the amount of frames that it will change between. And in this case, there is a period of 3 frames. The exposure change is about 10%. Tonal contrast change is 10%. And the color change is 10%. If we take those up all the way, then when we play it back, it's going to look like Christmas. But when you dial it in right, it just gives it a little bit more subtle film look, because when people make film, each frame is going to be just a little bit different, just enough that your eye doesn't really notice. And because it's so subtle, I've just been leaving film breadth at default. If we move down to gate weave is how much the film moves. That's going to have the same type of controls. Period is the same thing. So every 5 frames, you're going to have an X transition of about 17%, a Y translation of about 18%, rotation of about 7%. And then if I take my X transition and Y transition up, you see how the film kind of is jumpy in certain spots. So you can really do a lot with this. False colors, then we've got output, total impact. That's all the way up. If we take it down, then we go back to the original look of it, which is Canon log 3. And so we went from Canon log 3 to film emulation in just one node, which is pretty incredible. If you've got a camera that's not in the input setting, or if you've shot in a color profile that's not on the input setting, all you really have to do is put a node before this, color grade to that, and then in your choose camera source, you would just put Rec 709. Grade your footage here, Rec 709, and then every other step, just like I said. And the last thing that it has is a LUT generator where you can actually export your look. You'll have the colors for the film look, but you won't be able to have things like grain, gate weave, bloom, halation, all the things that this program is really good at doing. If you're interested in purchasing the Dehancer plugin, you can get it on their website, dehancer.com. I actually reached out to Dehancer after using the plugin for a while, and they gave me a creator code. So make sure to use the code AJWilliamsMedia at checkout. It's $349 for the pro version, and I know that seems like a lot of money, but you get a lot with it. You can actually get a light version that includes everything that the pro version does except halation, gate weave, film breath, false colors, the LUT generator, and ACES support. So if that's something that you need, then definitely get the Pro version. Dehancer also offers a lot of these separately, so if you've already got a film emulator that you love, but you only need, say, grain, or you want to use that gate weave function that I was talking about, they offer those as separate plugins on Dehancer.com. They've got the gate weave and film breath as one plugin, the Halation version 2, and the bloom effect as separate plugins. They've also got the grain effect as a separate plugin. So if you're looking to save some money and you only need one of those, then they've got you covered. They've also got a photo version where you can only export one frame at a time. The only downside is you still have to use DaVinci Resolve. The good news is I talked to the people at Dehancer and they're already in a private beta for Final Cut, and they're working on a version for Premiere, but that one probably won't be out until about 2022. That's gonna be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it the old thumbs up. I said that just like Gerald Undone. This is not a copy of your Filmconvert video at all. Anyway, if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel. I make videos that I hope will teach and inspire you to make better videos. If that's something that you're into, you know what to do. See you next time.